Part 66. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 651. The next morning, before dawn, the fine spring rain hit the window, making a soft rustling sound. In the boudoir on the second floor of the building, Su Buring opened his eyes. Aunt Lu was in his left hand and Xiao Qi was in his right hand. The baby was sleeping soundly on his chest, being pressed so hard that he could not move. Yufu was young and shy, huddled pitifully on the side. The horns were turned away from each other, looking like they couldn't bear to look at them. The whole body is soft and gentle, nothing more than that. Su Buletinling hugged her tightly and was really reluctant to get up, but it was impossible not to get up. She had to get things done before she could lie down carefree like this for the rest of her life. After lying there for a long time listening to the sound of rain, Su Buring took a deep breath, kissed the baby's forehead, and pinched Aunt Lu and Xiao Qi. After a while, Su Buletin allowed herself to dress neatly in the room, turned around and tucked in all the bedding. Song Yufu, who was sleeping in the back, was newlywed and separated a lot, but couldn't express it. She hid behind Lu Hongluan and whispered, "Mister, come back soon." The three eldest sisters did not speak, but the reluctance in their eyes was not concealed at all, even Xiao Qi, who had always been mentally tough. "It's just a few days away, not several years. If you don't want to leave, my husband also needs to recharge his batteries." Su Buring smiled, tapped his lips one after another, then turned and left the room. After washing, I came downstairs. Ning Qingyi put on light armor and a raincoat and bamboo hat, stood at the entrance of the shipbuilding, looked at the sky, and waited quietly. Zhu Manzi, who slept until the sun was basking on his buttocks, got up very early today and stood in front of him, still talking. "Xiaoning, we are sisters who worship each other and burn yellow paper. Look, I got up so early to see you off. Do you think you are worthy of me?" Su Buling was a little amused. He turned around and saw Kui Zioan standing at the door of the innermost room, holding a plate of grains in his hand and squatting on the ground to feed the geese. After seeing him, he raised his hand and waved. "Walk slowly. Goodbye." Su Buletinling waved his hand, turned around and left the shipbuilding. When he put on his raincoat, he noticed that Zhu Manzi's eyes were sour, as if he wanted to sweeten his words but was hesitant to speak. Su Buletinling understood what he was doing. He pressed Manzi against the wall and rubbed it until the little Manzi started to writhe. Ning Qingyi's eyebrows were furrowed, but she didn't try to save her good sister who was making trouble for herself. She led the big white horse and walked off the boat. Yujulu and more than 100 soldiers were already waiting under the boat. After Su Buling got off the boat on horseback, he galloped towards the southeast. The building boat also left the shore at the same time and traveled down the Wei River. In the imperial city, the palace gate has just opened, and hundreds of officials are filing in holding oil paper umbrellas, like black lotus leaves floating on the white stone royal road. Behind the Taiji Hall, Song Ji was holding a teacup, listening to the news that had just come from the detective department. Song Ying knelt down on one knee with a look of remorse on her face. Zhou Qingkai's martial arts skills are too strong. After leaving the city, he was like a mud cow in the sea. It is difficult to trace, however. On the way to pursue, I was in the eastern suburbs. I saw Prince Su being chased by wasps. Song Ji's eyes narrowed and he looked slightly unhappy. Song Ying quickly lowered her head. At that time, Crown Prince Su was carrying a woman on his shoulders. After discovering that he was holding the woman in his arms, he was suspected of deliberately covering his face. He checked last night and found that there was no young lady in the city. Missing. These messy things can be said to have no meaning at all, but Song Ying lost the crown prince of northern Qi and could not escape the blame. He could only tell some vague information to attract the emperor's attention. This move obviously had an effect. After Song Ji heard this, his brows furrowed slightly, and some doubts arose in his heart. Songji would definitely not believe it if he said that he was allowed to rob civilian girls. If the noble prince wants a woman, there is no need to fight for it. Even if he wants a princess as a concubine, the clan will not say a word. Maybe the little princess in the palace will fight over it? Women from ordinary families, not to mention. Since the woman's face was deliberately covered, it must be that the woman's identity was not visible to the public. Under the current situation, Miss Xiao, whose identity is the most sensitive, could be married openly and openly. What other woman needs to be secretive? The princess of northern Qi? Songji was holding the teacup. After a moment of silence, he had no clue, then he raised his hand and said, "Go and find out where Su Buling went. Promise." It rains heavily during the Qingming festival. On the official road outside Chang'an City, horses and carriages sometimes pass by, going to the ancestral mausoleum to pay homage to their deceased friends. Outside the Queen's mausoleum in the eastern suburbs, a carriage with the Kui family's brand name was slowly approaching. The maids and servants were carrying various memorial items and carefully cleaning the cemetery inside the Queen's mausoleum. Mrs. Kui, the eldest wife of the Kui family, got out of the carriage accompanied by her maid, held an oil paper umbrella, and walked slowly outside the Queen's mausoleum. Mrs. Kui was born in the Wang family of Taiyuan, one of the 5 great families. The city of Taiyuan was destroyed a few days ago, and her family was naturally affected. Very few people ran away, and most of them became the guests of the Northern Qi dynasty. Although the Northern Qi dynasty wanted to restore the country, it was inseparable from the support of various powerful officials and would not kill people directly related to the Wang family. However, coercion, inducement and intimidation always made the Wang family members who were officials in the court restrained. Mrs. Kui was naturally also affected. Affected, my mood has not been very good these days. Coming to the Queen's mausoleum during the Qingming festival to visit the tomb and pay homage was just a formality for Mrs. Kui. She was Queen Kui's biological mother and gave birth to her youngest daughter Kui Zioan when she was nearly 30 years old. Mrs. Kui didn't want to agree, knowing that Zioan couldn't get used to it. Her husband Kui Huelu must have explained those things to her beforehand. Otherwise, if Kui Zioan really died in the palace, Mrs. Kui would have gone to the palace to ask Songji for an explanation. Happened. Knowing that her daughter was fine, Mrs. Kui naturally didn't care about the sacrifice and felt it was a bit unlucky. Outside the Queen's mausoleum, there was a gentle spring rain. Mrs. Kui and her maidservants were strolling in the courtyard, waiting for the servants to prepare things, then burn incense sticks and return to Chang'an City. There were also guards in the meantime, who ran to burn some paper money for their former colleague Jia Yi. It's just that the Queen's mausoleum hasn't been tidied up yet. The guard who went to burn incense in the woods ran over first and bowed. "Madam, someone came here 2 days ago and cleaned Jia Yi's grave." When Mrs. Kui heard this, she was a little confused. Death warriors are trained since childhood. They have no name, surname, relatives, or friends. They are just tools to the family members, just like loyal dogs. If they can find a place to live after death, it is the end of the family's benevolence. Normally, there is no people will remember. She asked the guards to burn some paper money just because Jia Yi happened to be buried nearby, and Xiao Wan trusted this dead man very much. Mrs. Kui thought for a moment and walked to the small grave among the woods. Looking up, I saw that the weeds around the round tomb had been removed, and the distances were evenly matched, drawing a perfect circle. The small bamboo basket was still on the ground, empty inside, and there were only 3 sticks of incense in front of the wordless monument. I picked up 3 sticks of incense, no more and no less. The branches of several trees nearby have been chopped off, with no protrusions attached to the trunks. They were cut very carefully. When Mrs. Kui saw this neat and strange scene, her heart suddenly thumped, and she felt that something was wrong. She watched Xiao Wan grow up. Xiaowan planted trees in the peach blossoms, and she always tidied the nursery like this. If she made any mistake, she would be embarrassed and unable to eat. There is no one in the world who can come to visit Jia Yi's grave and still weed and cut branches like this. I couldn't find the second one at all. Mrs. Kui looked around, called the guard over, and said softly, "Immediately send someone back to Kui's house to find my second uncle and ask him to see how the peach blossom forest is growing. And here, we need to tidy up the surrounding vegetation. I don't know who did it, making it so ugly." The guard nodded and took the order. The old maid behind Mrs. Kui also felt a little familiar, but naturally it was impossible for the maid to know such secrets, so she just asked doubtfully. On the Qingming festival these days, people from the clan came to worship the queen yesterday. Jia Yi has been a eunuch in the palace for 10 years. Could it be that someone in the palace took care of it? Mrs. Kui was a little confused, shook her head and said, "Maybe, don't worry about it, let's go." Yes. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 652. In late spring and early summer, the rain is heaviest. From Chenkang to Zhujiang City, 700 miles away, it rained continuously for days. It was already late March when we arrived. To the northeast, the Northern Qi army has pushed to the north of Kaifeng, which is 600 miles away. The Qin region has high mountains and many passes, and south of the Yellow River is a flat plain. The general strategic direction of the Qi army is to cross the Yellow River into the hinterland of the Central Plains, and will not threaten Guanzhong Road for a while. As for the allied forces of the Four Kings, the army is still marching towards the northwest. In order to prevent the imperial court from directly pushing back, the king of Chu has deployed heavy troops to guard Nanyang, Xiangyang, Jingzhou, Yueyang, and Ezhou. Nanyang, the front line, is only a short distance away from Zhujiang. 500 miles away, it is considered the first-line main battlefield in direct contact between the two sides, also known as Woguandao. During the spring and autumn period, Qin and Chu attacked and defended each other for hundreds of years. This area was a dangerous fortress that must be fought over. It was known as whoever wins will live, and whoever loses will die. As long as the imperial army left Woguan, entering the plains of the Chu region, it is almost impossible to defend Ezhou where the king of Chu is located, and as long as the Four Kings coalition forces invade from here, they will be able to reach Chang'an in a few days. You can imagine the strategic significance. Outside Zhujiang City, the counter-rebel army camp was stationed here. More than 100,000 people gathered here and were sent to various defense lines. At dusk, General Guan Hongyi, wearing bright gold armor, stood outside the commander's tent, looking at the rear of Zhujiang City. The Ziliang army, which was invisible in front and behind, came from Guanzhong and gradually merged into the counter-rebel camp. All the elite soldiers of the imperial court were transferred to northern Xinjiang. The soldiers and horses stationed here were all transferred from the government soldiers and militiamen. Compared with the Ziliang army, there was a gap in all aspects. With such a strong army entering the battle, Guan Hongyi felt a lot more. He was confident, but when he saw the Ziliang generals speeding towards him, his eyes showed a little sadness. After all, these soldiers were not from his Guan family, but from the Su family. Although the emperor has given Guan Hongyi the full answer, with the four eastern kings here, as long as the Su family dares to disobey the emperor's orders, they will force them to rebel. Sitting back and reaping the benefits of being a fisherman, the world still has the surname Song, and he is the only one who will die. Su Buletinling really rebelled. Guan Hongyi must be the first to be used to sacrifice the flag by Su Buletinling. If they can cooperate well together to suppress the rebellion, who the hell wants to be used to sacrifice the flag? Therefore, how to get the military power of the Ziliang army is still a headache. After waiting for a while, more than 10 people entered the military camp on Pegasus. The man in the white robe at the head was carrying a long spear. The Suwang banner behind him had already identified his identity. The soldiers on the road quickly moved out of the way, and no one dared to stop them. Guan Hongyi put away all his thoughts and stood outside the tent with his head raised and holding the hilt of his sword, looking majestic. Guan Hongyi is the commander-in-chief of the counter-rebellion army, and Su Buling is just the leader of the army who came to assist in the defense. Su Buling is one level lower than Guan Hongyi. In the military camp, the commander's prestige is unquestionable, and even the emperor's orders can be ignored. Guan Hongyi would naturally not run to greet Su Buling with his face licked. Su Buling didn't show off to the vassal prince. He came to the military tent on Pegasus, got off his horse, raised his hand and saluted. General Guan. Guan Hongyi is in his 40s, quite tall, and has led troops for many years. He is also one of the famous generals in the imperial court. His face is neither happy nor angry, and he looks good-tempered. Facing Su Buling's salute, Guan Hongyi just raised his hand gently. No courtesy, it's an emergency during the war. Prince Su, please follow me and enter the account. Promise. Su Buling took Yang Zunyi and Tu Qianchu into the commander's tent. Dozens of military generals were already sitting in Commander Nyo's tent. The veteran generals in the imperial court who can fight are all fighting with the northern Qi dynasty at the border. Those who can come over and lead the soldiers to put down the rebellion are mostly military attachés who are not in the army. Many of them are young generals, and a few are still young. Not allowed to students in the imperial college. Su Buletinling walked to the front row of the handsome tent and sat down, with Yang Zunyi and others sitting on the left and right. Maybe it was because the reputation of the fourth general of Ziliang was too great. Even if he didn't say a word, it was a bit like being a guest and bullying the host. The discussion in the military tent gradually stopped. Guan Hongyi didn't care about this. Standing in front of the map, he talked about the counter-rebel advance route and the deployment of defenses everywhere. Without Su Buletinling's speculation, Guan Hongyi directly placed the Ziliang army in the vanguard position and sent out Wu Guan to attack Nanyang. The government soldiers and militia served as auxiliary troops to assist in the attack and clean up the surrounding areas of the battlefield. Yang Zunyi and Tu Qianchu were both veteran generals with outstanding military exploits. Was accused of being the commander-in-chief of the vanguard army, and responsible for the advancement of the Chinese army together with Guan Hongyi. When he arrived at Su Buling's place, he said, "There is no room for error on the battlefield. Prince Su has never led an army before, and the consequences of leading an army rashly are unpredictable. I didn't want Prince Su to be personally involved in danger, but the Holy One has said that Prince Su is the general after General Su Lai. Huzi, you can first lead an army of 3,000 and station it in Luanchuan County. With a little training, you will definitely be able to stand alone in the future." Tu Qianchu always had a bad temper, so he immediately became angry when he heard these words. They had discussed it before coming, knowing that the imperial court would definitely reduce Su Buling's military power, so that one army and two commanders would not allow Guan Hongyi to use troops as he pleased. But they didn't expect that the imperial court would cut it so hard. If you bring 50,000 Ziliang troops to help the imperial court fight the war, why not allow 3,000 troops to guard Luanchuan County? Where is Luanchuan County? The mountains and valleys more than 200 miles away from Nanyang are all on Kawugwan Road. They have no strategic significance. Taking 3,000 men to guard them is the same as saying, "You can take 3,000 men and rest somewhere cool, I will fight the battle." The Ziliang army only listens to orders from their superiors. Tu Qianchu and Yang Zunyi's only superior is Su Buling. Su Buling has gone to stay in the ravines. He can't make micro-maneuvers 200 miles away. At that time, he will have to listen to Guan Hongyi, who is one level higher in the official position. Dispatch, this is a blatant delegation of power to Su but not to Ling. As soon as Guan Hongyi spoke, Tu Qianchu slapped the table, Are you kidding? The young prince brought 50,000 people all the way here. What did you ask the young prince to bring 3,000 people to Luanchuan County to fight for? As long as Guan Hongyi takes half a step back today, it will be none of his business how the counter-rebels fight in the future. He naturally glared at this and said, Prince Su has never fought a single battle and has no merit in battle. How could I entrust 50,000 soldiers and horses to him? Your Majesty's intention is to let Prince Su lead the troops to hone their skills, and gradually master the troops from few to large. Famous generals from ancient times. This is all true. Even you, Tu Qin, came through this road. Could it be that you feel that the Holy Master's arrangement has treated Prince Su badly? This makes it clear that imperial power is oppressive. Tu Qin wanted to say something else, but Su Buling raised his hand. We are all one family, why bother fighting? The Holy Lord arranged this so that I can hone myself more, and I promise to accept the orders myself. But Su Buling raised his head and looked at Guan Hongyi. Leading troops to fight is not a child's play. The Ziliang army is mainly cavalry, and the Guanzhong army is mainly infantry. They are good at controlling cavalry with foot, and the methods of using troops are completely different. Guan's army is mainly cavalry. The general used to lead the Guanzhong army. Are you sure he can make good use of the 50,000 Ziliang army? If something goes wrong. Guan Hongyi raised his head with solemn eyes. I, Guan Hongyi, have been leading troops all my life. I don't need Prince Su's guidance on how to use troops. Prince Su can just guard Luanchuan County. Su Buling nodded. Before the war begins, things are unpredictable, so I won't waste any words. I just hope that General Guan can use his troops like a god and be foresighted, so as not to hold back the Ziliang army. If he delays the opportunity to fight, I don't need to open my mouth at that time. I'm afraid the courtiers in Taiji Palace will drown General Guan with their spit. Guan Hongyi felt a little confused when he heard this. Delays in fighter planes are mostly due to the friendly forces being unable to break through the defenses, or the enemy making mistakes and failing to seize the opportunity. He has great power, and the entire battlefield is under his nose. What opportunity can be delayed? Don't worry, Prince Su, as long as the Ziliang army obeys military orders, there will be no mistakes in this, General. Su Buling nodded and chuckled. Without saying anything more, he stood up and took the military talisman and left the Chinese army camp. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 653. Soon, Su Buling gathered 3,000 elite Ziliang troops, walked out of the camp outside Juyang City, and headed to Luanshan County to set up defenses. In addition to him, Yang Guanyu and Su Ying were among them, one commanding the infantry and the other leading 2,000 light cavalry. As for setting up defenses in the mountains, why did he bring cavalry? Since there were only 2,000 men, Guan Hongyi had just taken a huge advantage and hadn't yet digested it, so he naturally didn't ask. The infantry was not walking fast, and it was raining lightly. After walking for more than 10 miles, it became completely dark. The army set up camp in the mountains and waited for dawn to continue marching. Ziliang's military orders prohibited them from going anywhere, and they decided to take a good rest after setting up camp. There were no complaints, but the people around Su Buling were obviously a little unconvinced. In the small temporary tent, Su Buling looked at the map of the surrounding Luanshan County by light. Zhongli Jiju folded her cloak and placed it next to her. She was only wearing a thin gauze spring skirt. She knelt on the ground and spread the quilt. In the light of the fire, the thin skirt showed a little flesh color, like a big round pink ball. Shaking in front of Su Buletinling's eyes. Why? You brought 50,000 brothers here. My sister thought you were going to fight on the battlefield. But it turned out well. You brought people here all the way and made them responsible. This is no different from fighting in the village. The big village sent people to help the small village, but the people in the small village still had to listen to them. What's the difference? She was nagging, looking like a young daughter-in-law who felt that her husband was not living up to expectations. Su Buling was a little amused. He put down the map and raised his hand to pinch the rice dumplings beside him. This is not a fight between small villages, it's different. Zhongli Jiju shrank forward, turned around, half lying on the floor, covering her back with her hands, and gave Su Buling an angry look. Sister, it's not like I don't know how to settle accounts, tell me, is this cowardly? Why should the people under you give him orders? Su Buling leaned on the small table, dragged Jeju's feet over, took off the embroidered shoes, and gently massaged them in his hands. To put it simply, the old stockade is highly respected and everyone has their heart set on the old stockade. I am also a member of the old stockade. Now there is something going on in the old stockade. The leader of the village asked me to come back to help. I came back with a group of brothers who can fight. This is your duty. If you come back and take advantage of the strength of the people, you can steal the leader's dragon-headed staff. What do you mean by that? Zhongli Jeju lay on the quilt, thought about it carefully, and understood a little bit. She nodded slightly. You are ungrateful and bully others. The people in the village must be dissatisfied with you. That's right. Su Buling lowered his head, kissed the snow-white and crystal-clear feet, and continued. What I want is not only the command power, but also the sincere submission of everyone in the village. That is to say, the hundreds of thousands of people under Guan Hongyi and even the officials of the imperial court are all facing me from the bottom of their hearts. You see, I can fight with a bunch of people now. My brother returned to the village, and the village leader arranged for his men to take him away. Without saying anything, he arranged for me to stand guard outside, and I stood there carefully. As a result, when the village from the opposite side came over, the men assigned by the village master struggled to deal with it. I, the man on guard, and some of my brothers sacrificed their lives to help the village. What do you call this? Zhongli Jeju's face turned red, her eyes filled with spring, and she said softly. Both benevolence and righteousness. If this is true, the people of the village will definitely feel that the owner of the village is unreliable and has treated you badly. They will definitely be on your side. But now you are leading 3 people in the back mountain. Standing guard, there are hundreds of people fighting in the village on both sides in the front mountain, and you can't get in. How can you make merit? You'll know in a few days. Su Buling stood up, sat on the quilt, and patted Jeju. Good boy, turn around and lie down. Zhongli Jeju pursed her thin lips and gave Su Buling another angry look before reluctantly turning over and waiting with a small pillow in her arms. Unfortunately, just after Su Buling licked it carefully for a moment, footsteps could be heard outside the tent where the rain was pattering. The little sparrow shivering in the wind and rain called out, then shut up quickly, looking like he was being threatened again. Zhongli Jeju's face turned red and her breath was like blue. Her expression changed slightly when she heard the sound. She quickly pulled down her skirt, stood up and sat on her side, pulled Su Buling's hand over and put it on her lap, as if checking her pulse. Soon, the curtain of the tent was opened, and Zhongli Chuchu, who was wearing a raincoat, poked his head in, revealing a pair of green eyes. After glancing at it, he looked slightly confused. Master, why did it take you so long to check Su Buling? Is he really sick? Zhongli Jeju's breath was slightly unsteady, and he acted calmly and smiled. No, I just talked to him about things in the village, which took some time. Zhongli Chuchu looked in disbelief. She had just finished setting up the tent and laying out the bedding. In accordance with the duties of a doctor accompanying the army, the master came over to check Su Buling's physical condition and also asked why the soldiers were led by others. However, After waiting for a long time, the master did not come back. Chu Chu knew it in her heart. What did Zhongli Juju do? Seeing that Juju was still making excuses, Zhongli Chuchu was a little dissatisfied. He untied his raincoat and walked into the tent. He squatted down next to the floor bunk, glanced at it carefully, moved Juju's skirt further, and pointed at some water stains on the quilt. "Master, is your medicine bottle leaking? Why is it wet?" Zhongli Juju's expression turned red suddenly, and then became redder and redder like a fire. She quickly covered it with her skirt and hesitated. "Chu Chu, what's that? Is it raining? It's normal to have some water on your hands when you come in." Su Buling's stern expression was also a bit unbearable, and he softly smoothed things over for his wife. "Chu Chu, it's normal for a couple to be intimate occasionally." "What's normal?" Zhongli Chuchu pulled his master over, protected him behind him, and glared at Su Buling. "There are thousands of people outside. If you really like my master, how can you make fun of her on such an occasion? It's not like you don't know that she has a loud voice." Ouch! Zhongli Juju was almost ashamed to death. How could she bear being punished in public by her disciple? She quickly stood up, pulled Chu Chu and walked out. "Chu Chu, how old are you? Don't say such nonsense in the future." Satisfied, Zhongli Chuchu stood up and followed his master out. Before leaving, he did not forget to look back at Su Buling and snorted lightly. Su Buling sat alone on the quilt, spreading his hands and looking helpless. "Just now I was eating dumplings, but in a blink of an eye I was alone in an empty room, so I couldn't sleep." Su Buling lay down for a moment, then rolled up and got out of the tent and came to the camp. The camp of 3,000 people was not very big, but there were more than 100 large tents, and together with the civilian men escorting the supplies of food and grass, it almost occupied the entire valley. The night was dark and the spring rain was falling. The camp was dark and only the soldiers patrolling in the distance were walking back and forth. Su Buling braved the rain and silently walked through the tent and came to Ning Qingyi and Ning Yuhi's tent. He quietly lifted the curtain and took a look. Both master and apprentice were asleep, lying side by side on the ground, exposing their two bodies. Zhang Jiaomei's cheeks, one cold and charming, the other demure. Su Buling curled his lips, silently came to the floor and lay down next to Ning Qingyi. Ning Qingyi's martial arts skills were not low and she noticed something was wrong. She quickly opened her eyes and tried to touch the sword, but her mouth was covered. After a closer look, Su Buling was actually in front of her and made a shushing gesture. Ning Qingyi was so frightened that she quickly signaled to Ning Yuhi next to her with eyes that said, "Are you crazy?" Expression. Su Buling was naturally not crazy. He lay down next to Ning Qingyi, gently put his hands into the quilt, and continued to work. Not far away, Ning Yuhi lay quietly on his back, his eyelashes trembling. Her martial arts skills are much better than Qingyi's. How could Su Buling not notice when he ran in? He was also shocked. He thought he was going to bully Manzi in front of Qingyi. Fortunately, Su Buling didn't have the convulsion to that extent, and it wasn't directed at her. Ning Yuhi secretly breathed a sigh of relief, naturally pretending to be asleep and pretending that he didn't know what to do. Ning Qingyi's eyes widened and she looked at Su Buling in disbelief. After enduring it for a while, he realized that Su Buling was not leaving even though he had gotten an advantage, and was getting more and more aggressive. He immediately became angry. In an ordinary daughter's house, the elders would definitely not dare to say anything if they were lying in front of them. But Ning Qingyi was obviously not an ordinary daughter's family. She had always been outspoken. She felt that her master would find out sooner or later, so she made a prompt decision and pushed Ning Yuhi. Wu dash. Su Bulenling's eyes were filled with astonishment. He didn't expect that Qingye would dare to wake up Yuhi. It would be awkward for Yuhi to wake up and confront each other, so he had no choice but to stop and fly out, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Ning knew he didn't want to wake up at first, but it was like this. If she didn't wake up, she would have nothing to do. After Su Buling ran out, she opened her eyes in a daze and turned her head to look at her apprentice. King Yi, what's wrong? Ning King Yi's eyes were full of shame and anger, but she didn't dare to speak out. Seeing that the master didn't notice, she secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said softly, "Master, I'm fine, I had a nightmare." Ning Yu nodded, "Yeah, go to bed early." He closed his eyes again. Ning Qingyi couldn't sleep after being treated like this. She quietly took the sword and held it in her arms, then cautiously closed her eyes. Thank you to Mr. A Poisonous Book for the 30,000 reward. Thank you Shadow * Wolf BB for the 20,000 reward. Thank you Ihei for the huge reward. Guys, show your love to the Queen Mother's baby. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 654. Chu Land, as who? The beacon fire was ignited, and soldiers were everywhere in the grass and trees across thousands of miles of Chu. Outside the four gates of Ezhu city, recruiting platforms were set up. In front of the platforms, there was a sea of people, all of them men from all walks of life carrying swords and weapons. The people of Chu were very fond of martial arts, and besides Yuzhu, it was the place with the largest number of Jianghu people. Like other vassal kings, Chu King Song Zhangping maintained an excellent reputation in the territory under his jurisdiction and was deeply popular among the people. In addition, Song Zhangping was a martial artist since he was a child, and he liked to treat people in the world as brothers and had a wide range of friends. Now if you want to recruit troops, all you need to do is to say something like "The king is unjust, the king of Chu wants to seek justice for the victims of Tai Ying hunting deer," etc., and there will be countless stupid people with deep hatred and passion. Qing, come over and be cannon fodder. Although the Jianghu people are not good at cooperating in the battle formation, even if they are not good at it, they are still better than the farmers who only know how to dig the ground with hoes. Seeing the banners flying and coming to help from all directions, there was naturally a prosperous atmosphere in the Prince of Chu's palace. In the main hall of the palace, the King of Chu was sitting at the top. In addition to various generals, there were also leaders of Jianghu forces such as Hudishan and the Boat Gang. They were changing cups, and compliments such as "benevolent king" and "wise king" were heard endlessly. The King of Chu, Song Zhangping, was wearing a python robe, playing with the tea knife in his hand, with a warm expression. However, as a local vassal king, Song Zhangping had not yet been dazzled by his apparent strength. The land of Chu is backed by the three kings in the east, with Guanzhong in the front, and most of it is a plain area. It is true that the land is vast and rich in resources, but the geographical location is not very good. They said they were in alliance with the three eastern kings and would discuss who would be the emperor after Song Ji was brought down. But the three eastern kings obviously wanted Song Zhangping to be a pawn. Song Zhangping was angry, but there was nothing he could do. Standing on the side of the imperial court, it was impossible for Song Ji to give him the throne, which would be equivalent to working in vain. Standing on the side of the three kings of the east, right next to Guanzhong, if he doesn't come first, who will? In order to obtain the maximum benefit from this civil strife, Song Zhangping's only way was to take the lead, win the first victory in the Four Kings Conquer Ji battlefield, suppress the other three kings, and then be the first to lead troops into Chang'an. Let Song Ji take the Zen position. But it is obviously not easy to take this road. On the right side of Song Zhangping is Zhou Kai, the head of the Zhou family of Chu land, who is also the father-in-law of the king of Chu. Zhou Kai was holding a wine glass in his hand. After thinking for a long time, he said, "Your Majesty, I have a plan. I don't know if it will work." Song Zhangping put down the tea knife and turned slightly sideways. "It doesn't matter," Duke Zhou said. Zhou Kai touched his beard and thought about his words for a while before speaking. The day before yesterday, an old acquaintance from Chang'an City sent over the defense of Woguandao. The imperial court's counter-rebellion force included 20,000 Chinese troops, 100,000 government soldiers, 50,000 militiamen, and more than 70,000 engineers and civilians. Government soldiers, only 70% of the militiamen are fully armored. Most of the crossbows and war horses have been sent to the north. The weapons used are still old goods dug out from the warehouse. The weapons supervisor is working hard to build them, but they are still mainly in the northern Xinjiang. Very few were sent to the counter-rebels. Song Zhengping knew all this clearly. He dared to conspire with the three eastern kings. He was sure that the courtiers would rather change the emperor than let northern Qi enter the pass. The emperor Songji simply could not take into account both internal and external considerations. Moreover, after Songji came to power, he was too strong in power. The military attaché class was dissatisfied. Before the war started, someone sent all Guanhongyi's defenses. The four kings in the east were equivalent to a full map war. If they still couldn't get into Guanzhong, he deserves to be cut off. Song Zhengping listened for a moment and felt a bit verbose, so he raised his hand and said, "I know all this, but the 6 dangerous passes before and after Woguan Road, even if only civilians throw stones at them, it will be very costly for the Chu army to attack them. If we attack the pass in advance, when King Wu and others come, I will not have any men." Zhou Kai nodded, "That's true. But the current situation is not without variables. Guanhongyi has obtained 50,000 Ziliang troops, doubling his combat power, but the government soldiers and militiamen under him are really difficult to use. No matter how courageous Guanhongyi is, Guanhongyi did not dare to lead troops and horses out of Woguan Road, so he would definitely play it safe and choose to defend Woguan Road and wait for the situation in northern Xinjiang to turn around. Guanhongyi placed all the Ziliang troops in Shangnan, Woguan and other places to attack Ma Pass. However, they secretly built high walls and built city defenses, which also proves this conjecture." Song Zhengping nodded. "Guanhongyi only has so few troops under his command. If they come out and fight them, they will be gone. He will definitely become a tough bastard. If he wants to touch Songji, he will not let him move." Zhou Kai stroked his beard and continued, "The Ziliang army belongs to King Su. The imperial court wanted soldiers, but did not want King Su's army to have too much merit or even seize the military power, so he allowed Prince Su to run away with 3,000 soldiers. Went to Luanshan County outside the battlefield. Yes, I thought that Su Buling would be dissatisfied and fall out with the court. I never thought that Su Buling would hand over the military power without saying a word." Zhou Kai chuckled lightly, as the saying goes, if you don't use people you trust, you don't use them. This move by the court is obviously inappropriate. Prince Su and Prince Su will definitely be dissatisfied even if they don't say anything. If at this time, the prince sends more than 10,000 elite troops to leave Nanzhao County deterred and made a surprise attack on Luanshan County, Luanshan County's terrain is remote and worthless, and Guanhongyi did not station troops nearby, so he would definitely not be able to come to his aid, if Prince Su's son died in Luanshan County. When Song Zhengping heard this, his eyes narrowed slightly. If Su Buling died in Luanshan County, and the imperial court deliberately transferred Su Buling so far away, he would definitely not be able to escape the blame. Moreover, Guanhongyi would not have thought that if I left Woguan Road unattacked, I would waste our troops on Luanshan. Shan County fights. Zhou Kai nodded, "That's exactly what it is. The soldiers are in a deceitful way, attacking the city first and attacking the heart first. As long as Su Buling can be captured and killed, the imperial court will inevitably fall into civil strife. King Su is so angry that he counterattacks. Both are possible." Song Zhengping rubbed his fingers, thought carefully, and shook his head. "It's easy to attack Luanshan County, but it's harder to kill Su Buling than to climb to the sky. Su Buling is a tiger with only wings. Chen Daizai, Zhang Buhan, and Chen Chong are gone. If Su Buling wants to break out, no one under me can stop. Zhou Kai shook his head. I couldn't catch Su Buling and destroyed the 3,000 Ziliang troops. King Su is still in pain. Anyway, we can just retreat when we can't attack them, and we won't lose anything. Song Zhengping thought about it for a moment and felt that it made sense. He raised his hand and called his general over. On the other side, Luanshan County. Luanshan County is located in a mountain valley and is small in scale, with only about 300 households. Because there are high mountains behind it, there is no road for large groups to march. It has been a marginal area since ancient times. The walls of the county town were still built by the previous dynasty. And now there is only an earth barrier left, and the city gate is just a gap, without even a door beam. In early April, the weather was already a bit hot, and engineers and civilians were cutting down trees and digging trenches in the surrounding mountains in preparation for war. In the small county government office in the county seat, the county magistrate was boiling tea on a small stove, and the only two government officials stood guard outside the door. In the lobby, a dozen bamboo chairs were arranged in a circle. Yang Guanyu was too big and had no stool to sit on, so he could only stand beside him with his hands behind his back, like a blind bear standing with his hands behind his back. The nightingale with big braids stood on a hand-drawn diagram and explained in detail. The defense at the east gate is the weakest. We will take a detour from here and arrive at this location within a quarter of an hour. After the city gate is broken open, we can quickly enter the city to prevent soldiers and horses from other places from reacting and rushing to help. In the courtyard behind the yamen, Su Buling stood in front of the two cannons that had just been delivered, wiping them carefully with a cloth as if they were his daughters-in-law. Zhongli Jiju stood in front, holding an umbrella to help Su Buling shade from the sun. Zhongli Chuchu was leaning on the recliner and feeding the sparrows millet, while Ning Yuhi was meditating beside him. Ning Qingyi leaned against the pillars and listened to the battle plan outside. In the blink of an eye, it has been 7 or 8 days since they arrived in Luanshan County. At first, the four girls still held the ambition of advancing together, retreating together, living together, and dying together, and thought about standing on the city wall with Su Buling to fight the enemy bravely. The result was good. When I went to Luanshan County, I saw that the city wall was not as tall as Ningqingyi. 3,000 soldiers and horses could only stay outside the county seat. Even the road into the county seat would be impassable. As for fighting, let alone fighting. The original garrison in Luanshan County only consisted of a small group of soldiers in charge of the beacon tower. There was not even a bandit to be found within 10 miles. According to the county magistrate, the last time soldiers came, it was from the northern Qi dynasty. When the country was founded, a group of soldiers went astray. Why fight in this damn place? It is estimated that when the battle outside is over, the four of them can rest here. After Ning Qingyi listened for a while, she felt a little confused, so she walked up to Su Buling and asked softly. No one will attack here at all. You only have 3,000 soldiers at your disposal. Are you ready to fight out? Su Buling explained with a bit of smile in his eyes. In ancient times, those who used military force paid attention to attacking the city first and attacking the heart first. I was placed in this remote area, far away from the main battlefield, and the court would not care what I did. The king of Chu was busy fighting at Wuguan, and he would not even notice me. Guan Hongyi's general direction was to defend Wuguan Road instead of running out to fight. I guess the king of Chu could also see that, so he would not have thought that someone would go out of Wuguan Road and take a detour to take the back route. With 2,000 light cavalry, I can reach the north of Nanyang by taking a detour from Nanzhao County. With the speed of the Ziliang cavalry, I can rush to the gate of Nanyang City in just 2 hours. This is called tactical tactics. Road. Ning Qingyi frowned and thought for a while. The man named Guan asked you to guard here. Will it cause trouble for you if you leave without permission? Su Buling waved his hand, just say hello to him in advance. What does it mean to be absent without leave? Ning Qingyi didn't know much about this aspect, so she only nodded. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 655. 3 days later, in the Mashenko area. Tens of thousands of imperial troops were stationed on the left and right sides of the narrow Danjiang River, and a few miles away on the opposite side, the Mashen Pass, which the Chu army had occupied in advance, was already ready. In the Chinese army camp behind the majestic pass, Guan Hongyi was wearing battle armor and discussing the movements of the king of Chu with many generals. Half a month later, Guan Hongyi had already forgotten about Su Buling. The Ziliang army under his command was powerful and enforced orders, and the two veteran generals Tu Qinchu and Yang Zunyi also obeyed. The skillful operation made Guan Hongyi feel a little elated, and he yearned for the old General Su who led an army of millions to sweep across the southeast and northwest. If all the 50,000 Ziliang troops were his, he would really have the confidence to sweep across the country with 50,000 Ziliang cavalry. It's a pity that the imperial court only managed to squeeze out so few soldiers. If they ran out and killed them, Guanzhong became a little girl with the door wide open for anyone to poke at her. Guan Hongyi still had reason, so he still chose to proceed step by step, taking a defensive position to protect Guanzhong first, and then look for opportunities to seize Mashenko, Nanyang and other places. After discussing for a while in the military tent, a soldier suddenly ran into the tent, came to Guan Hongyi, and handed an urgent letter. General, Prince Su of Luanshan County has urgently reported that he is going to lead an army to attack Nanyang, and asked General Guan to quickly send 50,000 troops to help. As soon as the words came out, many staff generals in the military tent all stopped talking, their eyes full of confusion. Guan Hongyi was a little confused. He thought he had lost his job. He took the letter and took a look at it, but he saw it said, "Observe the stars at night, Nanyang can be broken with a single hand, send troops quickly for reinforcements." Wait, it sounded like an order. Guan Hongyi became angry immediately. He wanted to curse a few words, but with the soldiers of the Ziliang army around, he could only shout angrily. Nonsense! Isn't it like children playing house when marching and fighting? No wonder Guan Hongyi is so popular. The main idea of the letter is, I have calculated that the weather will be good tomorrow and Nanyang will be broken, so I will go to Nanyang with 2,000 troops to attack Nanyang. You will immediately send 50,000 people to come for reinforcements. A city as big as Nanyang has 15,000 defenders. According to the experience of our ancestors in 10 attacks, only 150,000 people can forcefully attack the city. If 2,000 people come to fight, are they rushing to rescue or rescue? Moreover, Mashenko is more than 100 miles away from Nanyang. Mashenko has not been captured yet, so how can we go to Nanyang? Guan Hongyi's heart was full of nameless fire. If he was not convinced by Su Buletinling, he could issue orders from a distance. As long as the orders were reasonable, he would not be unable to obey them. But if he listened to this and led 50,000 people to storm Mashenko and run to Nanyang, what if we don't capture it, won't we be made dumplings by the king of Chu? Guan Hongyi suppressed it for a long time, but still couldn't hold it back. He threw the letter paper on the map. Look at it. Should I have listened to His Highness the Crown Prince's orders? The staff and generals picked up the letter and circulated it around, with a bit of surprise in their eyes. Then they all shook their heads and frowned. How can this be done? How can there be such a fight? Guan Hongyi raised his hand, send the order? Let Su Buling go back to Luanshan County and stay there honestly? Don't say that I haven't persuaded him in advance. Let's give the court a hint and send this letter to the Holy Emperor so that all the courtiers can look, how the grandson of General Su fought. Promise. 300 miles away, under Nanyang City. In the dim night, Qingjing, the general under the command of King Chu, looked at the infantry filing out of the city with a bit of hesitation in his eyes. After all, sending 10,000 people to attack Luanshan County, which has no strategic value, is a bit of a joke. However, the strategy of taking a detour to attack Luanshan County was arranged by the king of Chu himself. With the Arima Pass in front, Nanyang would not be in danger of being surrounded for a while. Qinjing did not reject this proposal. Behind Qinjing, in addition to the generals who led the surprise attack, there were more than 10 men in military uniforms. The leader was Lin Yuzong, the young head of the Lin family in Hudishan. After Chen Daozai disappeared, Lin Yuzong basically became the leader of the Chu region. In addition, he boasted that he and Su Buling exchanged several moves to determine the outcome this time. The surprise attack on Su Buling made the king of Chu naturally pressed on his head. Lin Yuzong knew very well how much he weighed. He was beaten unconscious by Su Buling 3 times. How could he dare to take the lead and confront Su Buling? But the bullshit has gone out. If you want to give in at this time, you have no chance, so you have to bite the bullet and say, "Don't worry, General. As long as Su doesn't break through, I will definitely capture him alive." Qinjing knew how powerful Wu Kuei was, so he still warned him. Su Buling must not be an ordinary man, and don't try to be brave. With 3,000 Ziliang troops defending the city, it's normal that they can't defeat it. Try it once, and then withdraw if you can't defeat it. Don't make useless efforts. Promise. The generals leading the troops, Lin Yuzong and others nodded in agreement, then descended from the city wall and marched towards Nanzhao County with 10,000 elite soldiers mobilized. Dark clouds cover the moon, and you can't see your fingers among the mountains. The reason why Luanshan County has no strategic value is because the terrain is too poor. There are mountains in the southeast, northwest, and the only rugged mountain trails for people to walk. It is impossible to ride horses at all, and it is impossible to carry food and grass. Among the mountains, Su Buling led the horse chasing the wind, wearing a black cloak, walking slowly on the overgrown path. Chai Feng's horse is hung with a harness and a sword, its hooves are wrapped in cloth, and it wears a saddle muzzle to prevent it from making any noise when marching at night. The path was only for one person to walk on. Ning Yuhi led the horse and followed closely behind, carefully paying attention to the surrounding movements. The little sparrows were jumping on the tree tops, stopping after walking a short distance and waiting for a while. 1 mile away from the rear, 2 Qingzi Liangjing's cavalry were all in uniform, leading their horses and walking slowly, and Nightingale Chuchu was among them. Su Buletinling walked in front, naturally acting as a scout to clear out possible informants on the road to avoid being noticed by the Chu army. It stands to reason that this kind of work should be for ordinary soldiers, but when it comes to seeing 6 directions and hearing all directions, there is no one in the world who is more powerful than Su Buling. Holding a 7-stone bow, he can directly attack enemy scouts from a mile away. Seconds, it is estimated that the opponent does not even know where the person is, and ordinary soldiers do not have this ability. Originally, Su Buletinling planned to go ahead alone, but marching in the mountains was too lonely, so Ning Yuhi also became a companion. She was also very skilled in martial arts, so she would not be a hindrance. Luanshan County took a detour to Nanyang, which was about 200 miles, of which more than 100 miles were mountain roads. After leaving Nanzhao County, it was only flat. From the time we set out in the morning until now, we have only reached the vicinity of Nanzhao County. If we want to make a surprise attack, it is probably still difficult. They had to stay in the mountains of Nanzhao County for a day and wait until the early morning before launching a surprise attack. After walking for about an hour, Su Buling raised his hand and motioned to the little sparrow to go back and send the message, allowing the soldiers behind him to rest for 2/4 of an hour. Then use a knife to clear a small open space on the hillside where you can sit. Ning Yuhi's martial arts skills were excellent, but he did not feel any fatigue. After stopping, he glanced around a few times and saw that there was no movement in the surrounding barren mountains and ridges, so he sat down next to him and said softly, "Your Majesty, can you speak?" Although Ning knew he was not happy to actually go out to fight, Su Buling still let her put on light armor of fine quality to prevent stray arrows. Her breasts were too big, and the light armor was a bit tight and uncomfortable. After sitting down, she lifted his hands, untied a few ties under his ribs to let some air out. Seeing this, Su Buling put his cold hands under his breastplate to warm them. "There's no one around, just don't shout too loud." Noticing Su Buling's actions, Ning Yuhi's face turned slightly red, and his eyes had a different meaning. "Want to become a teacher?" Su Buletinling naturally misses her a little. In these days, Ning Yuhi had no chance to be intimate with him. Jeju did have 2 opportunities, but most of the time, Chu Chu came to kill him as soon as they got into a pose. But this situation was obviously not right. He looked around. "We are marching and fighting in the wilderness. I'm afraid this is a bit. This is not the first time. I never get a chance to be alone with you. Trying to comfort you is like being a thief." Ning Yuhi turned around and looked. He couldn't see here from a mile away, so he stood up and unfastened Su Buling's belt with his hands. Su Buling blinked, knowing that the master was also a little greedy, so he did not refuse. Men must have some courage and responsibility. After a while, Ning Yuhi frowned slightly, bit his lower lip, and his demure cheeks showed a bit of blush. Su Buling also snorted, adjusted his sitting position, put his arms around his master's waist, and said, "Master, don't be so hasty." Ning Yuhi rested his chin on Su Buling's shoulder, breathing quickly and slowly, and said quietly, "It's only 2/4 of an hour. It will be even more uncomfortable if you don't go up or down later. By the way, Ling how are you and King Yi? It's not okay to keep doing this. That damn bitch can stay with you openly, but I can only Duan Zen is a good example to others. If I want to be with you, I have to find a chance secretly." Su Buling had a smile on his lips. "It should be almost the same. Last time I ran into the tent to sneak around, I didn't say anything in the clear night. Not yet. You have to cook rice with King Yi, and then I can be discovered by King Yi and put the blame on that dead woman. I'll be gentle. If it's just Lang Qing's concubine, King Yi, there is still room for maneuver, and you will get into trouble." "Wow." Su Buling put Ning Yuhi on the grass, picked up his legs and carried him. "We are fighting now, let's wait until the situation is a little more stable. This kind of thing will happen naturally. The main thing is to see Qing Ye's intention." "What about Chu Chu?" "I've already said that. She hasn't left, so she should have figured it out." "How are you going to seduce her?" "I'm a little confused about what Chu Chu means. She's always on guard against me. She ignores me when I try to find her, and then she plays tricks on Jeju. That damn bitch deserves it. She even robbed her own apprentice's man, all of it. Hee hee." Time was tight and I couldn't say much, so I just sprinted. 2/4 of an hour later, Su Buling felt comfortable all over, stood up, straightened his robe, led the horse and continued on the mountain road. There were some beads of sweat on Ning Yu's forehead. She hadn't been intimate with Su Buling for a long time, and she was still a little dizzy. She followed behind and lowered her head to fasten her light armor to avoid exposing any flaws. The 2 people walked through the mountains and fields. They didn't know how far they walked, and gradually reached an open area. When they saw the lights of Nanzhao County in the distance, Su Buling suddenly frowned and raised his hand. Ning Yuhi was still a little unfinished and kept staring at Su Buling's back. After seeing this, he came back to his senses, held the hilt of the sword and listened. Several voices came from far away in the mountains and forests in the middle of the night. "Brother Lin, did you really fight Su Buling in front of Master Kingxiu with no outcome?" "That's natural. As the saying goes, when we meet on a narrow road, the brave will win. At that time, I was holding the tiger head spear passed down by my family, and Su Buling was holding the water dragon yin, the most important weapon of the Qi dynasty. He also had an advantage in weapons. Ningyu, he tilted his head slightly, inexplicably. There are only 2 chapters today. Big guys, please give a heart to the Queen Mother baby. Please give me a photo at the end of the month. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 656. It was past 3 o'clock, near the Black Tiger Temple in the north of Nanzhao County. 6 strong men were walking with weapons in their hands, chatting casually about Jianghu affairs. Nanzhao County is within the control of the King of Chu. It is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and connected to the Chu plains on the back. It is considered a remote area. The Chu army responsible for the raid on Luanshan County set up camp in the open area outside the county seat. After daybreak, they entered the mountains and marched quickly to strive for the early morning of the day after tomorrow. Launch a raid on Luanshan County. Lin Yuzong and other martial arts masters who were specially designed to deal with Su Buling, because of their strong single-person combat capabilities, took advantage of the night to come over to explore the terrain to see if there were any sentries in the mountains. They were not out of King Chu's control yet, and the surrounding areas were all barren mountains. After walking for a long time, there was not even a trace of a ghost. Naturally, the 6 Jianghu people were a little slack, but King Chu paid them a lot of money to kill Su Buletin Ling. I still have to do it well, and I still walk and explore seriously. Lin Yuzong, the young master of Hutu Mountain, walked in the front with the tiger head gun. On the surface, he was very heroic, but in his heart, Lin Yuzong knew Su Buling's combat power clearly. They were the only ones who left. There was a high probability that this trip would end in death in the wilderness, but Niu Biao went out, and he belonged to the forces under King Chu. King Chu arranged the job for Lin Yuzong. How could he refuse? At this time, I have been secretly thinking about how to save my life without being embarrassed. Next to Lin Yuzong was a man holding a pair of swords. He was one of the leaders of the Chu Debot gang. He had heard about Su Buling's skills for a long time and had never believed it in his heart. At this time, he left with Lin Yuzong, who had fought against Su Buling. Together, naturally there are the most problems. Then what path did Su Buletin Ling take? I heard that if you can beat Xuechenzi, you must be practicing martial arts, right? Lin Yuzong felt guilty in his heart, but he still had to keep up his appearance. He chuckled, that's right, when you fought with me, you used the Lin family gun. You acted in a decent way, but it's a pity that there is no action. The idea is that I took advantage of my natural strength. The man with 2 swords listened for a long time and felt something was wrong. Brother Lin, what you said means that you can take advantage of the weapons, the condescending position, and the strength. After taking so many advantages, I am able to draw a tie with you. Well, the fight was not over at that time. Master Kingxiu was afraid that each other would be harmed, so he came out to start a fight. It was really hard to say whether the outcome would be the end. The man with 2 swords showed some admiration in his eyes. Brother Lin really deserves his reputation. Yeah. The 5 people following behind also nodded in agreement. The man with the 2 swords wanted to ask a few more questions, but before he opened his mouth, he realized something was wrong. 6 people had arrived. He and Lin Yuzong were 2 people, plus the 5 others who nodded yes. Why is there one more? The man with the double sword was puzzled. He turned around and saw that among the 5 people following him, there was a tall young man in white robe. He was very handsome. He also held a sword in his hand. It didn't matter. He walked slowly, not knowing how far he had followed. The man with two swords thought he had forgotten his mission? But he had never met this young man in the military camp. He asked in confusion. Your Excellency were just sent here by the King of Chu. Lin Yuzong turned around when he heard the sound. As soon as he saw the white shadow in his peripheral vision, his whole body froze. When Su Buling heard the words "the King of Chu just sent me," he understood the origin of these Jianghu people. He said with a bit of a smile. "Brother Lin? Don't you know me? You guys came to this deep mountain and old forest at night, can't you hunt?" Lin Yuzong's face was ashen, and he held the tiger head gun motionless, only turning his eyes twice. Although the six of them were not masters, they were by no means mediocre. One of them secretly sensed that something was wrong, secretly stretched his waist behind his back, and tried to activate the communication fireworks on his belt. Rustle. It was this moment. The night wind swept across the mountain forest, and the cold light suddenly burst out silently. The white robe swept up the fallen leaves in the forest, and the 4-foot blade drew a silver line in the night. With just one spin, the 4 people around him were all cut in half before they could even move. Before the screams could be heard, Su Buling struck out with another knife from his backhand, swiping it across the necks of the 4 of them. The sound stopped suddenly, and the 4 people who were still joking just now turned into 12 pieces. Pieces of meat fell to the ground and blood flowed everywhere. The man with the double sword's eyes changed from a dazed to a heartbroken one in an instant. He quickly raised his double sword to block and retreat. But he never thought that before he could see the movement clearly, the blade would strike from below. Puff! A little spark burst out in the night. The man with the double sword still had a look of fear in his eyes. His body was divided into 2 pieces and fell to both sides. Thump! The woods fell silent. Su Buling waved the blade lightly, sprinkling some blood drops on the blade, and turned his head to look at Lin Yuzong, who was standing a few steps away. In the blink of an eye, Lin Yuzong reacted, but did not dare to move. He still maintained a stiff posture and raised his fingers slightly. Perhaps, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince does not have to be like this. He is just a stranger in the world. For the sake of our acquaintance in the past. Su Buling put the sword back into its scabbard with a calm look in his eyes. What did the King of Chu send Brother Lin to do? To assassinate me. Lin Yuzong knew that he was already a fish on the chopping block. After thinking about it, he threw the tiger head gun on the ground. My Lin family is under the jurisdiction of the King of Chu, so I have no choice but to help the King of Chu. The day before yesterday, the King of Chu ordered Nanyang Guard Qinjing to send 10,000 troops to attack Luanshan County in an attempt to kill His Highness. In order to prevent the Crown Prince from breaking out, a certain number and General Chen Xiao, who was leading the troops, came to intercept. When Su Buling heard this, he was really confused. If the King of Chu doesn't fight Woguandao, why did he come to fight me? The prince is not staying in Luanshan County. Why did he go south to summon him? Well, the army is cunning, and the cunning goes together. Su Buling nodded, and he was not afraid. After all, 10,000 people staying outside are much easier to fight than 10,000 people guarding the city. He turned his head and looked at the dozen pieces of rotten meat on the ground. You are here to stop me. Lin Yuzong's expression was stiff. The contemporary masters have basically been killed by the prince. There is no one in Chu who dares to take this job. The King of Chu also forced me to come here. I really don't want to come. You see, I don't even have the intention to take action. Where is the Chu army stationed? North of Nanzhao County, only more than 5 miles away from here. I came here to explore the way first. Su Buling nodded, turned, and walked towards the woods. Pick up the gun and follow me in the future. Your Hudishan is quite famous in Chu, and you know all kinds of people. There are many. Please help me recruit soldiers and horses in the future. Your Lin family will definitely benefit from it. Lin Yuzong felt relieved. It was a great honor for him to have saved his life. He didn't dare to say a word. He quickly picked up the iron gun from the ground and trotted behind him. "Don't worry, Master Su. As long as you enter Chu, my Lin family will follow you to the death. You came from Nanyang, so you probably know the deployment of the Chu army, right?" "What deployment?" "It means where there are more soldiers and where there are fewer soldiers." "Are there any trenches, bunkers and other fortifications?" "I see. Well, I came all the way from Nanyang. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 657. Outside Nanzhao County, military tents are in a row. The king of Chu has all the soldiers under his command. They are civilians in their spare time and soldiers in wartime. Without long-term training, their military quality cannot be too high. Although there is no problem in general, if you look closely, the distance between the military tents is uneven, and the roadblocks and trenches to prevent attacks on the camp are also relatively simple, which is obviously different from the Ziliang army and Guangzhou army. It was almost dawn, and there was no sound in the military tents. Only the patrolling Chu soldiers were left, holding spears and patrolling back and forth outside the camp. There was a bonfire in the distance of the camp to prevent night attacks, but most of them had been extinguished. In the woods on the north side, Su Buling led his horse forward silently, followed by 2,000 cavalrymen. Following Lin Yuzong's instructions, they cleared out the scouts along the way and had already reached a mile outside the military camp. Nightingale took a telescope, aimed at the tree for a moment, and waved slightly at the bottom. "There is a trench 200 steps away, the horse can jump over, there are 3 barricades in front, and the left wing is a rice field, the weakest defense." Su Buling raised his hand to knock Lin Yuzong unconscious, and whispered to the back, "I will lead 500 people to attack the camp from the front, Su Ying, you lead the rest of the troops to attack from the side and directly take the general's tent. After burning the food and supplies, don't fight, and rush to Nanyang immediately." Su Ying had already put on the black armor. After receiving the order, he raised his hand and led 1,500 light cavalry to move to the left wing. Ning Yuhi and Ning Qingyi also wanted to follow Su Buling, but attacking the camp at night was completely different from the robbery of the Jianghu people. It was not easy to kill 10,000 pigs running around. Su Buling didn't let them join in the fun, but just protected the artillery that was brought over with great difficulty in the rear. After Su Ying arrived at the designated location silently, Su Buling led 500 Ziliang cavalry out of the woods, mounted their horses, formed a battle formation in the night, and gently raised their long spears. In the Chu army camp, Chen Xiao, the commander who led the troops to raid Luanshan County, had already fallen asleep. There was a map of the surrounding area of Luanshan County on the table, but it was too old and basically meaningless. He had to temporarily find an old man in the county to dictate and modify the drawn route. Dong dong dong. The earth was shaking. The strange sound came suddenly, as if someone was beating a drum in the distance, or thousands of beasts were galloping. Chen Xiao suddenly woke up. As a general under the king of Chu, he had rotated to assist in defense in the northern border, so he knew that it was the sound of horse hooves, war horses. Dayo lacks war horses, especially good-bred war horses. Chu is located in the hinterland, and the court will not give war horses at all. All soldiers and horses are infantry. The king of Chu spent a lot of effort to gather a group of elite cavalry, and the horses used are also inferior horses commonly seen in the rivers and lakes. It was urgent but not chaotic like thunder. There was no other sound except the horses' hooves. Just this dull sound can make people feel the majesty of the elite army. Chen Xiao had heard this kind of horse hoof sound before. It was when he was helping to defend the northern border. When the Liaxi army heavy cavalry passed through the border, he saw it from a distance. Not to mention the armor and equipment, Just the bloody smell of the battlefield can make people feel scared from a distance. Nanzhao County, how could there be a border cavalry? Chen Xiao's first thought when he woke up was this, and the second thought that followed was the trembling from the bottom of his heart. He suddenly turned over, grabbed the sword from the side, and roared. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Dong, dong, dong. The real war drums had already sounded chaotically outside the camp. The huge camp was in chaos in an instant. The patrolling infantry, looking at the giant beast that suddenly rushed in the dark night, ran behind the bunker in panic. The sleeping Chu soldiers suddenly woke up, turned over, and looked for helmets and weapons, crossbows, but it was obviously too late. A mile away, the Ziliang light cavalry sprinted at full speed, almost giving the Chu army no time to draw their bows and arrows. After a wave of arrows on horseback, the defenseless front camp of the Chu army wailed everywhere, and the rear camp was unclear about the situation and instantly became a headless fly. Su Buling, holding a 10-foot-long horse lance, rushed to the front on his own horse, and blocked the chevaux de frise with one lance, shouting angrily. Su Ying, lead 8,000 light cavalry to attack the flank. The voice was like thunder, and he overwhelmed the noise of the army and reached everyone's ears. Then, the left wing was filled with overwhelming shouts. Kill! Kill! The momentum was like a tide. In the camp, Chen Xiao knew that the other party was bluffing. If they dared to attack the camp, they must have arranged the attack route in advance, so why did they shout in front of the battle? But he knew that the soldiers under his command obviously didn't know this. 500 cavalry rushed into the 10,000-man army camp. In the night, it was impossible to see how many people there were. A fire was lit, and only screams and shouts of killing were left in the huge camp. The soldiers, who were already unprepared, had not experienced war for many years. They collapsed almost instantly. They didn't even know what to do. How could they talk about fighting the enemy? The Ziliang army's long-term opponent is the border army of northern Qi, which is much stronger than the palace soldiers. The 2,000 people led by Su Buling are the elite of the Ziliang army, and they are all cavalry. Even if they set up a frontal battle formation, the 2,000 Ziliang iron cavalry are sure to disperse the 10,000 infantry, not to mention the current mess. It is not an exaggeration to describe it as slaughtering pigs. The 2,000 Ziliang iron cavalry entered the camp, and they had already estimated the combat power of the Chu army's palace soldiers, but when they really fought, they found that they were still overestimated. The entire camp only had the personal soldiers near Chen Xiao, who organized some resistance, and the rest of the Chu army was running all over the ground with their armor and helmets thrown away. Su Buling held a horse spear like a purgatory killing god, and wherever he passed, there were limbs all over the ground without leaving a complete body, and almost rushed out a bloodline in the camp. After the few generals were dismembered in a face-to-face encounter, no one could organize resistance anymore. After just one charge from left to right, the entire camp began to completely flee. General Chen Xiao recognized the armor of the Ziliang army. When he saw the white-robed general riding the wind-chasing horse and looking down on everyone in the firelight, he knew who was coming. General Su Lai had accumulated power for 60 years. In the hearts of the military officers of Daiyou, he was the god of war. Su Buling's inhuman combat power had long been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Seeing that it was Su Buling who led the Ziliang army to charge into the military camp, even Chen Xiao lost his will to fight in an instant. He turned around and broke through with some of his personal soldiers, rushing towards Nanzhao County, trying to defend the city. The sky was dark and full of smoke and fire. The remaining Chu army fled to the mountains and fields to avoid the cavalry. In a war of annihilation with the strong bullying the weak, the Ziliang army did not need to command at all. After breaking through the Chu army's formation, they began to divide the battlefield and gradually strangle it. However, Su Buling's goal was not these 10,000 miscellaneous soldiers who appeared inexplicably. He wanted to fight Nanyang. After about half an hour, the Chu army was completely defeated and scattered into the surrounding mountains and fields. Su Buling burned the food and supplies, rushed out of the camp from the south, and rushed towards Nanyang, 100 miles away, along the flat Chu plain. At the edge of the woods on the north side, dozens of soldiers and armored soldiers who stayed behind quickly moved forward after a team of light cavalry pulled a few carriages back, lifted 4 small cannons on them, and then rushed to Nanyang with the cavalry. Ning Qingyi and Zhongli Chuchu rode on war horses, looking at the sea of fire in the distance like purgatory on earth. Even though they were women of the martial arts world, they were a little scared. The people of Jianghu traveled the world with swords. The strong ones among them had amazing fighting power. They could easily kill dozens or hundreds of soldiers. They usually did not take the soldiers seriously. But when Ning Qingyi saw the scene of thousands of people rushing into the camp of tens of thousands of people, he finally understood why the government had the final say in the world. With such a big battle, no matter how strong the warrior was, he could only stir up a small splash. Dong dong dong. The sound of horse hooves was like thunder, and disappeared at the end of the sky of the Chu plain in the blink of an eye. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 658. In the early morning, Nanyang city was peaceful. The 4 gates were wide open. Food, grass, and baggage were transported from the rear. There was also no shortage of people coming in and out. The army was still recruiting troops in an orderly manner. Above the city, the Chu army was on routine patrol, well prepared with rolling wood, stones, fire, oil, etc. However, as long as the imperial troops did not leave Ma Pass, Nanyang could only be regarded as the rear area, and there could be no war. The patrolling officers and soldiers were not many. In the commander's mansion in the city, Qin Jing, the general of the Chu army, was sitting in the meeting hall, discussing the battle at Mashenko with his generals. Because the king of Chu did not want to suffer too much loss before the arrival of the armies of the 3 kings from the east, the Chu army had been conducting tentative attacks. Guan Hongyi also focused on defending, hoping to delay the situation in northern Xinjiang for a turn, so there was basically no major conflict between the two sides. After listening to the report from his subordinates, Qin Jing turned his attention to the north corner of the map and looked at the small circle on it. Chen Shao led his troops to attack Luanshan and should have reached Nanzhao County. Report. Before Qin Jing could finish his sentence, a sudden shout came from outside the lobby. When the generals in the meeting hall heard the anxious sounds, their expressions changed. They thought that the imperial court was about to launch a general attack, so they all hurriedly stood up and looked outside the door. Qin Jing's eyelids also twitched, knowing that there might be big changes. The scout rushed in almost rolling and crawling, and said urgently, "Report, General, a group of cavalry suddenly appeared 10 miles away from the north, wearing Ziliang military armor, the number is unknown, and they are rapidly approaching Nanyang." What? North? Chile? The sentries outside are all blind. As soon as the voice came out, there was chaos in the meeting hall. There was no need for Qin Jing to give orders, and some generals ran out to prepare for war. At a distance of 10 miles, it took at most 2 quarters for the cavalry to come over. The battle report was a little slower, and everyone went straight into the city. There was a bit of astonishment in Qin Jing's eyes. He originally thought that the Ziliang cavalry had broken through Mashan Pass, but after scanning the map, he felt something was wrong. Mashan Pass is in the west, with Nanzhao County in the north, and then there are high mountains. There is no marching route at all. Did this army fall from the sky? The war was suddenly imminent. Qin Jing had no time to think so much and said hurriedly, "Send orders to Xiangyang and Mashenko to quickly mobilize troops and return reinforcements." All remaining soldiers and horses in the city must go to the city wall to defend until the reinforcements arrive. As he spoke, Qin Jing ran out of the commander's residence and quickly climbed to the top of Nanyang city. The generals raised their eyes to the north, and sure enough they saw smoke and dust billowing on the plain in the distance, and a large army of soldiers and horses coming towards Nanyang. However, Qin Jing was also a veteran on the battlefield. He just took a glance and realized that there were too few people. On top of the city, oil was being burned and crossbows were fired in preparation for war. The deputy general stood in front of him, raised his eyes and looked at it, secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "General, the maximum number is only 5,000. The cavalry cannot carry ladders or crash carts. Is this Ziliang army here to send it off?" When Qin Jing saw this scene, he also felt that the other party was here to send him off. Not to mention 5,000 men, but 10,000 Ziliang cavalry, raided Nanyang city, and they had to be blinded as soon as the city gate was closed. Without ladders and siege equipment in the shield chariot, would it be difficult to climb the 3-foot-high city wall with bare hands? But the Ziliang army is one of the most elite troops in Daewoo. If Qin Jing is killed, he will not believe that this cavalry team went the wrong way. He thought for a moment. "Are you here to surrender?" The lieutenant general thought it was possible, but after thinking about it he shook his head. "It is possible to surrender, but where did this cavalry team come from? It is impossible to cross the Mashan Pass without any movement. If you want to surrender, you will definitely surrender to Maka Mountain. How can you go to Nanyang? Run." The two could only discuss it for a while. As soon as the city gate was closed and the drawbridge was pulled up, the outline of the large cavalry army in the distance was already visible. It was more than 3 miles away, so it was unclear who was leading the team, but they could get a rough idea of the number of people. There were only about 2,000 people, which was less than they expected. Qin Jing was so old that this was the first time he encountered such a situation, and he was at a loss for a while. The densely packed soldiers on the north wall watched helplessly as 2,000 Ziliang cavalry ran nearby, and then quickly deviated from the direction, passing by the plain on the right and running further south. Qin Jing looked at the direction of the march and felt that the opponent was preparing to attack the south city wall, which was the weakest in defense. However, no matter how weak the defense was, there were still more than 1,000 people waiting in formation. With the city wall as a support, how could these 2,000 people attack and break the city? Could there be an inside job? Thinking of this, Qin Jing's expression changed slightly. "Quick! When you go to Nanjing, be sure to guard the city gate. Promise." The large group of soldiers and horses quickly mobilized along the horse path on the city wall towards the south city. In the streets and alleys of Nanyang city, officers and soldiers also strode towards Nanjing. Unfortunately, before Qin Jing could reach the other side of Nanyang city, a thunderbolt exploded from several miles away. Boom boom. Su Buring brought 2,000 Kinki to the vicinity of Nanyang city, bypassed the most heavily guarded north gate, and went directly to 1 mile outside the south city gate. 2,000 light cavalry stopped and stood by, because within the range of the bed crossbow and divine arm crossbow, everyone first found a temporary bunker. Su Buling and Su Ying put on their double swords, with ropes hanging behind their backs. Behind them were 10 warriors. Ning Qingyi and Ning Yuhi also followed behind with their swords raised, ready to go. The deputy general pulled the carriage, lifted the 4 small artillery pieces on it, and placed them on the gun mounts. The 600-pound small artillery can only hit more than 1 mile, and the caliber is not large. It will definitely not be able to break down the city wall, and it cannot even break the city gate. But it is definitely enough to scare people with explosive shells. If there is no heavy artillery to break the city, it may not be possible. I won't risk my life if I don't do it. After the 4 artillery pieces were lined up, the Ziliang sergeants who had been trained long ago quickly loaded and aimed. Su Buling carried two swords on his back and said in a deep voice, "Don't shoot off the target, I can't avoid it." "Don't worry, my prince, it won't go off the target." Su Buling nodded, without giving the other party any chance to adjust their defense, and said loudly, "Fire!" Boom boom. In the early summer of the 12th year of Zhaohong, 4 loud noises exploded outside Nanyang city. The sound was like thunder, and it was heard several miles away. The whole city heard it, and tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians turned their heads together. 4 flames were like fire pythons swallowing the city, accompanied by thick smoke, and spewed out several feet away. Before they could see clearly, there was another noise above the south city. In the shocked eyes of many Chu soldiers guarding the city, 2 large holes appeared on the gate tower, and a gap was broken in the parapet. Smoke and dust rolled, and gravel flew. Several people were unable to avoid it and were bloody on the spot. On the top of the east city wall, Qin Jing, who was running at full speed, was startled by the loud noise. The deputy general behind him shrank his neck and instinctively looked up at the sky, thinking it was thunder. Boom boom. After a short hesitation, 4 more loud noises came from afar. The soldiers on the top of the city wall all showed a look of horror, their eyes full of fear of the unknown. Qin Jing was stunned for a moment before he came to his senses, and hurriedly scolded his subordinates and continued to run towards the south city. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 659. Above the southern city, the guard stood dumbfounded under the city gate. Hundreds of Chu soldiers beside him ran away with their heads in their hands, shouting words such as magic, Thunder Lord, and fled under the city wall. The explosive bombs exploded, igniting the fire oil and other defensive equipment. In an instant, thick smoke billowed above the city. Many soldiers were injured by the gravel and lay on the ground rolling and wailing. It was during this dazed moment that Su Buling led more than 10 people and ran through the open area under the city wall. Nanyang is located in the rear. Because of the need for troops, horses, and supplies to enter and exit, the roads have not been dug and the trenches have not been connected. The only obstacle to the city wall is the moat. The artillery bombardment from all sides behind them was indiscriminate, not seeking to kill, but just to disturb the defenders on the wall and make it difficult for them to use their bows and arrows to hinder them. A mile away, Su Buling ran with all his strength. In a moment, he had reached the moat alone. He jumped across the 2-foot-wide moat with all his strength, and then flew up. The long sword on his back was unsheathed and struck the suspension bridge iron chain. Above. Ding ding. After 2 crisp sounds, Su Buling inserted his swords into the city wall and reached the top of the crenellation. Everything went smoothly, but in the blink of an eye, the suspension bridge hit the moat. The shelling from behind had stopped, but the defenders on the top of the city hadn't recovered yet. When they noticed someone rushing up the city wall, they picked up their weapons in anger and tried to drive them away. But if you don't let him go up the city wall, you can kill 1 person in Nanjing in close combat. The city wall is only about 10 feet wide. There are people on both sides and you can't shoot arrows. How can you drive him down? Cha cha cha. The 2 swords were swung like the wind, and the 7 or 8 soldiers around him were instantly reduced to pieces. The soldiers on the left and right were so frightened by this formation that they could not dare to step forward and die. Su Buling held a knife in one hand, took off the rope from his waist and threw it down the city wall. Su Ying, who was following behind, grabbed the rope and pulled Su Ying up the city wall with a sudden pull. When there was someone behind him, Su Buling freed his hands, held 2 swords, and directly chopped melons and vegetables. He went around the Urn city and killed hundreds of people. Hundreds of people crowded on the city wall and horse path, and they were killed in just a moment. His blood flowed into a river and he fled backward. After Nengqingyi and Nengyu closed the city wall, they followed behind to cover the 10 warriors of the Ziliang army behind them. Su Buling jumped directly from the inside of the city wall and landed behind the city gate. He turned a blind eye to the surrounding soldiers and armor, kicked away the sandbags and wood that were not piled up, and then stood on the street behind the city gate. The 10 soldiers worked together to lift the giant tree, open the city gate, and then ran in to open the gate of Wencheng. Kill. The city is broken. Outside Nanyang city, after discovering that the city gate was open, the 2,000 Ziliang cavalry troops rushed towards the city gate without any hesitation. This time, no one interfered. The archers on both sides of the city began to rain down arrows. However, at such a close distance, the Ziliang iron cavalry was much better at archery than the soldiers at the city. People were filing in through the wide open city gate. In this very short period of time, before the soldiers and horses in the city came to support from other places, the south gate was already breached. Qingjing quickly ran to the corner of the city wall horse road and found that a large number of Ziliang troops had entered the city, and his face was ashen. As a veteran on the battlefield, Qingjing knew the Ziliang army's combat power very well. He could still hold on to the city wall and engage in street fighting and horse fighting. The small number of defenders in the city was probably not enough to show off. The soldiers and civilians in the city were in chaos, and the screams and shouts of killing at the south gate were loud. Su Buling was covered in blood after being killed. After the Ziliang army entered the city, he jumped onto the city gate tower, holding a knife and shouting angrily. Ziliang Subuling is here. Where is Qingjing? You can avoid death by surrendering, otherwise we will slaughter your entire family. Kill. That night, the imperial counter-rebels behind Mashenko were still strengthening the city defense in an orderly manner, waiting to be domestically abused by the 4 kings in turn. In the commander's tent of the Chinese army camp, Guan Hongyi sat in the main seat, holding a teacup in his hand, quietly listening to the frontline guard general's report on work, and occasionally asked Yang Zunyi for his opinion. Yang Zunyi was quite kind and praised the marching arrangements of many young generals. He also did not forget to praise Guan Hongyi and praised his wonderful defense arrangements. Many of the generals' sons were naturally a little proud when they were praised so highly by the great general of the Ziliang army. They were either humble or reciprocated, and there was a cheerful atmosphere. But in the middle of the discussion, Guan Hongyi's deputy general suddenly ran in and said loudly, "General, the Chu army at Mashenko suddenly released many bunker posts and seems to have begun to withdraw." Withdrawal. The general's staff in the big tent stopped talking, looking slightly confused. The confrontation between the two sides was going well. Why did the Chu army withdraw inexplicably? Once Mashan Pass is released, Nanyang will be behind it. The terrain around Nanyang is too open and easy to be surrounded. The only pass that can be defended is Xiangyang. Does King Chu want to die? Guan Hongyi was also confused. He put down his teacup, stood up and walked out of the tent. He quickly came to the critical moment and looked up at the Chu army's defense line in the distance. As expected, the Chu army's defense line began to shrink on a large scale, and they rushed back in a hurry. When Guan Hongyi saw this scene, he was a little confused and couldn't figure it out, so he looked at Yang Zunyi next to him. "General Yang, is the Chu army trying to lure a snake out of its hole?" Yang Zunyi stood with his hands behind his back, looking like he couldn't understand, and shook his head and said, "General, I don't dare to make any assumptions. General Guan is the commander-in-chief, so he should have a certain idea in his mind." Guan Hongyi naturally knew that as soon as the Chu army released Mashan Pass, Nanyang was in danger. Once Nanyang was defeated, the counter-rebellion troops approached Xiangyang and directly blocked the King of Chu. The King of Chu even beat the Guanzhong road, he just chopped off his head. Didn't believe that the Chu army would let Mashan Pass go. Many generals also had the same idea in their minds, thinking that it might be a trick to lure the snake out of its hole, but this trick looked too suspicious. Guan Hongyi and many generals watched helplessly as the Chu army in the distance lost most of its troops, and even the torches were only 30% of their original strength. In this case, as long as you attack with all your strength, you will definitely be able to break through. But if he goes out and is ambushed and suffers heavy losses, Guan Zhong may be in danger. Guan Hongyi was still hesitant, until about an hour later, the deputy general suddenly ran over in a hurry and said urgently. Urgent report to the general. The Prince of Su has sent a message via flying pigeon. Nanyang has been conquered. 40,000 Chu troops have returned to surround Nanyang. The Prince of Su is defending the city and asks the general why the reinforcements are delayed. What? How is this possible? As soon as the words came out, many generals were in an uproar at the critical moment. No wonder the Chu army at Mashenko retreated in a hurry. Nanyang's retreat was cut off, and if he didn't retreat, he would die. But how did Nanyang break? Guan Hongyi's face turned pale suddenly, turned around and asked angrily, nonsense, how can Nanyang be broken? How can Nanyang's 15,000 defenders and 2,000 men break the city? The deputy general couldn't answer the question, so he lowered his head and was speechless. Yang Zunyi's face turned slightly solemn and he said, His Royal Highness said he was going to attack Nanyang, but it is really impossible for 2,000 people to attack Nanyang. It is very much like a trick to lure a snake out of its cave. Why don't we send spies to check the situation first? Guan Hongyi didn't believe it either, but the spies came back and forth, and the army had passed for at least 5 days. If it was true, Su Buling broke through Nanyang and waited for reinforcements. He was suspicious at Maka Mountain and did not go, asking the Chu army to he counterattacked and went back, without saying what Su Buling would do to him afterwards. All the civil and military officials could kill him and use him as a negative example for future generations. Thinking of this, Guan Hongyi's heart became cold and he hurriedly ordered, open the door and slaughter Qin Chu. Then we can mobilize 20,000 cavalry troops to leave the pass and go to Nanyang at full speed to relieve the siege. Yang Zunyi will follow with 30,000 infantry. Hurry. Yang Zunyi looked slightly disappointed, nodded, turned around and took the order. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 660. The next morning, Chang'an, 700 miles away. The deep sound of bells resounded throughout the imperial capital, and the streets and alleys began their daily routine. All officials passed through the palace gate and came to the Taiji Grand Hall, discussing the war in the northern border as usual. After several months of continuous retreat, under internal and external troubles, the morale of daimyo from the army to the court fell to the bottom, but there is always a limit to further decline. The national strength of northern Qi is limited, and it is a bit weak to push north of the Yellow River. Although the Guanzhong army and the Liaxi army have been defeated repeatedly, the ability of the commander is still there, and it has not collapsed in general, and it can be said that they are in a stalemate with northern Qi. However, the ugly battle with northern Qi also made all officials realize the reality that daimyo is no longer the daimyo that rose from a small place and snowballed across the world 60 years ago. The soldiers and equipment may not be bad, but there is really no talent. The two great commanders Guo Zhongxian and Yang Qingjai can only tie with Zhou Qingkaiu, the national teacher of northern Qi. They even have time to come to Chang'an for a stroll, but Guo Zhongxian and Yang Qingjai dare not even sleep. The gap in talent is really a bit scary. If you look for the reason, it is still related to Songji's emphasis on culture and suppression of military. Songji succeeded to the throne for 10 years and basically killed all those who could fight, not to mention the distant past, Lu Pingyang and Hans Hongaiu, who intended to support Songyu to usurp the throne last year, are the two generals of daimyo second only to the Su family, and their ability to fight is definitely better than that of Guan Taiwei, who is scratching his hair all day long. If it weren't for his great military achievements and being suppressed too harshly by Song Ji, why would Lu Pingyang go to support Song Yu to take the throne? Now that the entire Lu and Han families have been executed, there will be no talented commanders when a war breaks out, and the court officials are naturally furious. Although the court officials did not dare to mention Lu, Han, and others who intended to usurp the throne, they could still use the past to satirize the present. After talking about the situation in the northern border, Xiaofuli stroked his beard and sighed. Alas, Guo Zhongxian is good at defense but not good at attacking. Yang Qingjai is good at attacking, but his fighting style is a bit reckless. He hurts 800 of his own for every 1,000 enemies he injures, which is still not advisable. If General Su were here, he would have more than 300,000 elite soldiers under his command, and he would have armor and war horses, but he would not be able to figure out how to lose the battle. The topic specifically mentioned that the commander was not good, and the officials were silent, but they all understood the meaning in their hearts. As the head of the military officers, the Grand Commandant Guan Hongzhou was naturally embarrassed when he heard this, and said, "The current situation is different, and it cannot be compared. Zhou Qingkai is the national teacher of the enemy country, but his talent is truly outstanding, and he is definitely not a person who has gained fame in vain. In addition, our dynasty has suffered a series of natural disasters, and the four kings in the east have different intentions. The strong enemy is unstable in the front and back, and it is not easy to fight like this, and there are only a few heroes like General Su from ancient times to the present, so how can there be one generation after generation? Take the Prince of Su for example. He is a master of both civil and military affairs, but when it comes to using troops and fighting, he is still a layman." When the ministers heard this, they also felt that it made sense. After all, Su Buling was really a bit embarrassing for General Su Lai. The day before yesterday, Guan Hongyi sent the letter over, and all the civil and military officials were stunned. Observe the stars at night, think it's okay, lead 2,000 troops, and attack Nanyang from behind. Is this a decision that a normal person can make? He also waved his hand and asked Guan Hongyi to send a large army to help. This is not a joke. Xiaofuli followed the topic and sighed. Fortunately, Su Buling was not allowed to lead 50,000 Ziliang troops, otherwise he would have gone out of the pass and fought randomly at this time. What kind of people are leading the troops in my great Yu? This is to scold all the military officers together, but in fact it is still scolding Song Ji for messing around and making the military class unavailable. Song Ji naturally couldn't follow suit to scold Su Buling. Seeing Su Buling's hilarious letter, Song Ji felt relieved. At least such a reckless and stupid man would definitely not be able to rule the world. Hearing Li Si's words, Song Ji said softly, "Su Buling is still young and impulsive. It is not surprising that he made such a ridiculous decision when he led troops for the first time. After a few more years of training, he will naturally become a useful talent." All the ministers nodded. After all, he is the son of Prince Su. Now he is still using his soldiers. It is not good to take advantage of him. So they continued to discuss the war. Just after chatting for a while, the messenger outside the hall shouted, "Report victory." When the ministers heard that it was victory, they were silent and turned to look outside the hall. These few months have been tossed by the war in the northern border. It has been a long time since I heard this voice. Song Ji also sat up straighter and raised his hand slightly. "Speak." The messenger walked into the hall quickly. Perhaps he had heard from his colleagues that he was interrupted several times last time he reported. After entering, he said in a hurry, "Report, yesterday morning, Prince Su led 2,000 troops to defeat more than 10,000 Chu troops in Nanzhao County, and then launched a surprise attack on Nanyang. Nanyang was subsequently defeated and the city has been occupied." Wow! No matter how fast the messenger spoke, he was interrupted by the uproar of the ministers before he could finish. Song Ji staggered slightly. with a bit of surprise in his eyes. All kinds of noisy voices from the ministers also sounded. Why did Su Buling go to Nanzhao County? How could there be 10,000 Chu troops in Nanzhao County? Is there no garrison in Nanyang? It's only been a few days, and the horses in Ziliang have wings after marching and attacking the city. Since it is a battle report, it can't be false. Song Ji was shocked for a moment, and quickly raised his hand and said, "Go on. Have you defended Nanyang?" When the ministers heard this, they quickly quieted down, with a bit of urgency in their eyes. After all, the success this time was much greater than the last time Su Buling captured the crown prince of northern Qi. Nanyang in the rear was broken, and Maka Mountain was bound to fall. Since the beginning of the Qin-Chu struggle for hegemony in the spring and autumn period, Chu lost this place, and the situation was basically over. Even if the allied forces of the Four Kings arrived, they could only be blocked south of Xiangyang. The imperial court directly moved from defense to offense, from passivity to initiative. The post envoy held up the paper tube and continued, "Prince Su led his troops to break through Nanyang. The army from Maka Mountain returned to support. 40,000 Chu troops besieged the city and attacked it. It is in danger. It is not yet known whether the city will be broken. General Guan Hongyi sent out 5 troops last night. Guan, go to rescue the siege." When Song Ji heard this, his face turned slightly pale, and he secretly thought something was wrong. When the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty heard this, they immediately went crazy. Lu Chang'an was furious and said, "Nanyang was broken during the day. Why did Guan Hongyi's reinforcements leave at night? An army of 50,000 people will be in Nanyang for at least 3 days. 2,000 people will defend 40,000 people, which is 20 times the force. How can Su Buling defend it?" Of course, Yishi couldn't answer this question. As the elder brother, Guan Hongzhou quickly stepped forward to explain. "Prince Su's marching arrangements are too trivial. Guan Hongyi has a heavy responsibility to guard the pass and cannot make any mistakes. It is reasonable for him not to adopt Prince Su's arrangements. Moreover, he also issued a military order to Prince Su, telling him not to bring any the soldiers raided Nanyang." Everyone knew these words well, because even they didn't believe that Su Buling dared to attack Nanyang and could win. But if they really defeat it, the problem will be huge. Xiao Chuayang's face was solemn, and he said in a deep voice, "Fighting opportunities are fleeting. Since ancient times, there has been a saying that the general will not accept the order of the foreign king. Su Buling found out that Nanyang could be defeated, so he would not listen to Guan Hongyi's military orders. What's wrong with leading troops to attack Nanyang immediately? Since Nanyang has been defeated, it means that the marching plan is correct. Guan Hongyi is on the front line, no fighter plane was found, and the reinforcements took a long time to leave last night. How can it be unreasonable to delay the military plane? Can it be explained?" Guan Hongzhou opened his mouth. Prince Su said that he would watch the stars at night. This. So what about stargazing at night? If Nanyang is defeated, it means that the judgment is correct. Guan Hongyi is very close to the front line. He doesn't know how to stargaze. Is it possible that he can't even see the slightest fighter plane? Guan Hongzhou was speechless. The ministers also felt this was the case, and they laughed at me beforehand. Although they had some doubts, after all, they were more than 700 miles away and did not understand the front-line occupation. It was normal for them to misjudge the situation after hearing only one side of the story. But Guan Hongyi was stationed at Maka Mountain, and Su Buling dismissed the advance notification of reinforcements. He also sent a letter to the court to mock Su Buling. They had already conquered Nanyang before they thought of reinforcements. This can only show that Guan Hongyi is short-sighted, and his view of the overall situation is completely different from that of Su Buling. The problem is not as big as usual. Su Bulenling came so suddenly. Song Ji was also a little confused. The Ziliang army invaded and plundered like fire in the front, while Guan Hongyi remained as motionless as a mountain in the rear. At this point, if Nanyang can hold on, it depends on Su or not, and Guan Hongyi has become a foolish general. If he cannot hold on, it will be even worse, and Guan Hongyi will probably die to apologize. It is obviously impossible to remove Su Buling's military power and distribute it to remote areas. But Su Buling could not be punished on the grounds that Su Buling had made meritorious deeds privately, as such a big victory was coming to his face. The throne would probably be unstable. Song Ji still spoke. Call Guan Hongyi and tell him to rescue Nanyang City before it breaks through. If Su Buletinling makes any mistakes, let him come to see him. Promise. Upon hearing this, the post envoy quickly took the order and left. Thank you. Listen to people's laughter for the 50,000 reward. Thank you to Mr. Rotella for the huge reward. Push the main line. Guys, please give a thumbs up to Mr. Baby. It's the end of the month, please give me a monthly pass.